Good afternoon, my name is Alan Gamble and we're here to look at the Aussie box office charts for the weekend. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with, we have a new number one with A Complete Unknown moving up to top spot, knocking down Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Finally has been dethroned and knocked off top spot, and didn't just go from top spot to second, it went from top spot to number 4. But A Complete Unknown led the charts this week with $1.1 million, a 15% drop, which is a remarkably low drop for a current total of $4.2 million. In position 2, we have the new entry of Babygirl with Nicole Kidman at $952,000 for a current total of just over $1.1 million. Holding at number 3, we have Mufasa the Lion King at $880,000. It's 7th week in the charts with a drop of 31% for a current total of $27 million. At number 4, we have the former king, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, with another $787,000. 6th week in the charts with a 44% drop for a current total of $29.2 million. And lastly, in the top 5 is Paddington in Peru with another $700,000. Week 5, 44% drop for a current total of $16.2 million. Now, what we're seeing right now is the back to school effect. All the kids are back to school, so the entire box office, but specifically those animated movies, had a significant drop off in box office returns. We have Mufasa staying in number 3, but Sonic and Paddington to Peru both drop spots. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 dropping from number 1 down to number 4 is your big story this week. But that said, it's still brought in a current total of $29 million. It's doing quite well in Australia, but will be interesting to see how we move forward next week, and more importantly, a bounce back the weekend after. And before we jump over to 6 through 10, I wanted to take a quick look at the total domestic box office for each week so far in the year, because one thing I noticed this weekend, last weekend was the lowest for 2025 so far. This weekend was lower again. So I pulled the numbers from 2023 and 2024, and I was pretty amazed with how well they aligned. Weekend 1 to weekend 2 to weekend 3 to weekend 4 to weekend 5 historically have all had the exact same trend. We can see it there. 2025 opened stronger. Weekend 2 was so close between 2024 and 2025. I believe there was like $10,000 between the two amounts. But weekend 3, they were almost the same. Weekend 4, 2023 was slightly higher, which was largely being carried by Avatar, The Way of the Water. But yeah, as you can see there, it's less alarming and more of an expected trend. I'm going to keep monitoring this as we move forward through the year to see how we're aligning in 2025. And finally, moving on to 6 through 10 for last weekend. At number 6, we have We Live in Time, dropping another 41% in week 3 for another $675,000, a total of $5.1 million. Conclave holds at number 7 with another $509,000 after 4 weeks of release with another 24% hold, which is a really nice hold for a current total of $5.8 million. Companion at number 8 with $502,000 for a current total of $562,000. At number 9, we have Creation of the Gods 2 Demon Force with $426,000, a new entry with a current total of $566,000. It's a Chinese epic fantasy film directed by Rushan. It's a sequel to the obvious Creation of the Gods 1 Kingdom of Storms. And at number 10, we have Detective Chinatown 1900 with $416,000, another new entry in the charts with a current total of $532,000. Is a comedy mystery buddy movie, so it's something a little bit lighter in context. We have 2 entries from China, with Creation of the Gods 2 Demon Force and Detective Chinatown 1900. Both of those are released as part of the Chinese New Year, as China historically does that every year, where Chinese New Year, they release a bunch of big movies and they bring in a lot of money. Obviously, they didn't bring in as much money in Australia, but they still did have a sizable boost of a very limited screenings, because the people that celebrate Chinese New Year still want to be in the loop with what their friends and family might be watching back home. Both Creation of the Gods 2 and Detective Chinatown 1900 brought in almost identical amounts of money, and they both opened in around 65 screens. That tells me there's a large audience that will seek these movies out, and the audience is the same between both of these 2 movies. On average per screen, they brought in around $6,500 each, where, for comparison, A Complete Unknown, with its total of $1.1 million, the position number 1 this week, but that was playing in over 300 screens, so it brought in an average of $3,600 per screen. So you can see there's almost twice the amount of demand for these Chinese releases this week. Outside of the top 10, Maria, that was opening last weekend, opened outside the top 10 in 13th position with just under $300,000. Flight Risk dropped out of the top 10 with a heavy 56% drop in weekend 2 into around 16th position. And moving right along into the top 10 of 2025. So this is all movies released calendar 2025, which is why there are so few, and all the movies have not brought in that much money yet. That should change in a couple of weeks, where I expect to see maybe Captain America and Bridget Jones shoot up to the top of this chart. But let's take a look. Not too many changes. Paddington in Peru is still at number 1 with $16.2 million. Nosferatu is at number 2 with $7.6 million. Conclave is at number 3 with $5.8 million. At number 4, We Live in Time with $5.1 million. A Complete Unknown moves up to 5th position with $4.2 million. At number 6, drops down Den of Thieves 2 Pantera with $2.5 million. Babygirl enters the chart at number 7 with just over $1.1 million. Flight Risk stays at number 8 with $1.15 million. Wolfman is at number 9 with $1.13 million. And then The Brutalist still sneaks in at number 10 with just over $1 million for calendar year 2025. Jumping across to February 6th of what's upcoming this week in wide releases. We start off with September 5, the historical drama about the 1972 Munich Olympics hostage crisis. That one is on my radar. I do plan on catching that one when it drops. It did drop earlier in the States, but Australia, we always get the awards contenders a little bit later. And then we have Presence, the new film from Steven Soderbergh, the indie horror movie put out by Neon. Next up, we have Queer, the latest from Luca Guadagnino, one that was originally looking like it might be in the Oscar race, but it looks like it did miss out at the end. And lastly, the last wide release is Widow Clicquot, which looks like a more art house product movie that we've been getting the last few years, but this one's focused on the historical 18th century origins of the Veuve Clicquot family Champagne Empire. In limited release, there's only a couple of movies dropping that are of particular note. The first one is Dark Nuns, which is a Korean dark horror thriller about 2 nuns that have to perform an exorcism that, well, I'm sure it will go poorly. It's a genre that we see a lot in Western movies, but this is a Korean interpretation of a similar vibe, potentially. Next up, we have Thunderum, a Malayan language family comedy movie out of India. So those are the two limited releases coming up this week. And lastly, checking out what's dropping on streaming platforms in terms of TV and sometimes the occasional movies. We start off with Apple Cider Vinegar, a new series on Netflix that is an Australian limited drama series about a pair of social media influencers in the early days of influencer culture and their wellness empire riding high until the truth comes out, I'm sure. It's based on a true story, so I think I do remember hearing about this as it was unfolding back in the day. And lastly there, on the 6th of February, Invincible returns for Season 3 over on Amazon. So if you've been eagerly awaiting that one, it does launch this week. And taking a quick look at what I watched last week in terms of the Cinechums Movie Challenge, this week being short, the large definition that I interpreted was the movie taking place over a short period of time. So I ended up with a few good, interesting movies. The first one was 1948's Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. Pretty unsung gem in terms of when you hear about Hitchcock. It often doesn't come up as often as the big heavy hitters Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho. Rope is kind of in the pack, but I really enjoyed it. It was kind of messed up, a little bit twisted. The second movie I watched was the Taylor Swift short, All Too Well. And I've got to say, Taylor Swift is definitely a talented artist and she does have a good eye for film. Her DP, Rena Yang, is phenomenal. The vibes and the energy that short film captured was carried a lot by Rena Yang, in my opinion. Next up was 1993's Falling Down with Michael Douglas, directed by Joel Schumacher. An interesting movie that was a very early Walter White or Joker scenario of we live in a society. I could see this character being very, very misinterpreted, but the one thing this movie had going for it that later movies didn't, this movie clearly stated that the main protagonist was the villain. It was a very interesting movie. Glad I've got that off my watch list. And lastly was 1998's German movie Run Lola Run, a movie that takes place in the entirety of about 20 minutes and said time loops. Phenomenal soundtrack, still holds up, very 90s, but great movie, great storytelling, great pacing, doesn't let up at all. But that's all I watched last week. And let's move on. And onto the Cinechums Movie Challenge for this week, where the theme is road. Now, there's a few things. Any road trip movie counts as this. Breaking Down, Stranded type movies count. High-speed chase movies count. Getaway movies count. Trucker movies and hitchhiker movies. Or movies with road, street, avenue, highway in the actual name of the film. All count, so there's a few good examples, but my shortlist that I've come up with is things like Speed Racer, Drive My Car, I want to get off my watch list, that's been on there for a while. Two-Lane Blacktop is something that's been on my watch list for a long time. Taxi Driver, things like Roadhouse or Mulholland Drive might be good rewatches. Wall Street, Street Fighter always count as well. So we'll see how we go. That is it for me this week. Nice short week. I'm looking forward to an equally quiet week next week as there's not too many big titles releasing. I think the following week is going to be the first big 2025 blockbuster weekend with those two big heavy hitters of Bridget Jones, All About the Boy, and Captain America Brave New World. We'll see how we go moving forward with those, but next weekend I expect an equally quiet next weekend and quite possibly a lower total gross than this weekend since everyone's back at work, everyone's back at school. But I will see you next week. See ya. Bye.